It started 3 weeks earlier when his longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, retired after serving his family for 30 years. The staffing agency sent over a replacement, a young woman named Elena Morales, who could barely meet his eyes during the interview. She was 24, spoke with a slight accent, and seemed to shrink whenever he entered a room. Marcus hired her mostly because he was too busy with a merger to interview anyone else. Elena was different from Mrs. Patterson in every way. Where his former housekeeper had been chatty and confident, Elena was silent and skittish. She arrived at 6 in the morning and left by 2 in the afternoon, completing her work with an efficiency that was almost invisible. Marcus rarely saw her, which suited him fine. He had a company to run, investors to satisfy, and competitors to crush. But Marcus had been having trouble sleeping lately. The merger was proving more complicated than anticipated, and his board was questioning his decisions for the first time in years. 2 nights ago, he'd come home at midnight to find a covered plate in his refrigerator. Chicken soup with a handwritten note in careful English. Mr. Chen looked tired today. Soup helps. Elena. He'd eaten it standing at the counter, surprised by how much his grandmother's recipe tasted like it. He never mentioned it to her. Last night, he'd worked until 3 in the morning and collapsed into bed fully clothed. When he woke at noon, his shoes had been removed, a blanket draped over him, and his laptop closed and charging on his desk. Again, no mention, no expectation of thanks, just quiet kindness from someone he barely acknowledged. Tonight, Marcus had a plan. He'd been reading articles about employee loyalty, wondering why his executive team showed no genuine care while this shy maid seemed to notice everything. He wanted to understand what drove people like Elena. So he decided to conduct an experiment, unethical perhaps, but Marcus had never been much concerned with conventional morality when seeking answers. He came home at his usual 10 o'clock, greeted Elena with his typical curt nod. She was working late to deep clean his study and announced he was going to bed early. He changed, lay down, and slowed his breathing into the rhythm of sleep. Then he waited. 15 minutes passed. He heard Elena's soft footsteps approaching his bedroom door, which he deliberately left ajar. She hesitated in the doorway. He could sense her uncertainty. Then she entered quietly, probably to close the curtains he'd left open. But she didn't just close the curtains. Through barely opened eyelids, Marcus watched her move around his room with careful precision. She picked up the jacket he'd tossed on a chair, folded it gently, and placed it in his closet. She organized the scattered papers on his nightstand into a neat pile. She adjusted the thermostat. He always kept it too cold. Then she did something that made his chest tighten. She walked to his bookshelf and picked up the only photograph he kept in his bedroom, a picture of him as a boy with his mother, taken just months before she died. Elena looked at it for a long moment, then carefully dusted the frame with the cloth she carried and returned it to its place. She moved toward the door, and Marcus thought the experiment was over. But she paused, turned back, and approached his bed. His heart rate quickened. What was she doing? Elena stood beside him for a moment. And then, so gently he almost didn't feel it, she adjusted his blanket, pulling it up over his shoulders the way a mother might tuck in a child. You work too hard, Mr. Chen, she whispered in Spanish, probably thinking he couldn't understand. But Marcus's mother had been bilingual, and he'd grown up speaking both English and Spanish. You carry the whole world on your shoulders. I wish someone would tell you it's okay to rest. She turned to leave, but then paused again. Marcus heard a small sound, a sniffle. Was she crying? My father was like you, she continued in Spanish, her voice barely audible. So determined to provide for us that he forgot to live. He worked 3 jobs, never slept, never laughed anymore. When his heart gave out at 47, he died at his desk. The last thing he said to me was that he wished he'd spent more time living, and less time proving himself. Elena's voice cracked. You remind me of him, Mr. Chen, so much. I see you come home exhausted every night, eating alone, working until you can barely stand. You have so much money, such a beautiful home, but I never see you smile, never see friends visit, never see you just be happy. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I know you don't notice me. I'm just the maid, but I pray for you every night. I pray you find whatever it is you're searching for before it's too late. I pray you learn that you're enough just as you are, without the $1 billion or the fancy titles. I pray God sends someone to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Marcus felt something wet on his own cheeks. Tears. Actual tears. Elena took a shaky breath. Sleep well, Mr. Chen. Tomorrow I'll make you breakfast before I leave. You never eat breakfast, but you should. It's the most important meal of the day. That's what my papa used to say. She walked to the door, but before she left, she turned one last time. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me this job when I needed it most. My daughter starts treatment next week because of the health insurance you provide. You saved her life, and you don't even know her name. That's the kind of man you are, saving people without even realizing it. The door clicked shut softly. Marcus lay there in the darkness, tears streaming freely now, his whole body shaking with silent sobs he couldn't control. When had he become so isolated? When had success replaced joy? When had he stopped being the boy who dreamed of making his mother proud and became this hollow version of achievement? Elena's daughter was sick. She was supporting a family, grieving her father, struggling in ways Marcus couldn't imagine. And yet she'd taken time to care for him, a man who barely acknowledged her existence. She saw him as a human being, not a billionaire. She worried about his soul, not his stock price. The next morning, Marcus walked into his kitchen at 6:30. Elena nearly dropped the pan she was holding when she saw him. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry, I didn't expect— Sit down, Elena, he said gently. Her eyes widened with fear. Did I do something wrong? I can explain. Please sit. She sat reluctantly at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly in her lap, looking terrified. Marcus sat across from her. How old is your daughter? Elena's face went pale. Sir? Your daughter. The one who's starting treatment. How old is she? I don't understand. I wasn't asleep last night, Marcus said quietly. I heard what you said. The color drained completely from Elena's face. Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate. I had no right. Please, I need this job. I'll never— Elena. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her trembling hands. How old is your daughter? 7, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Sophia, she's 7. She has leukemia. Marcus nodded slowly. And your father, when did he pass? 2 years ago. I'm sorry. He meant it. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Why do you care what happens to me? She looked confused. Sir, you pray for me. You worry about me. You notice when I'm tired. Why? I'm just your employer. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. Because everyone deserves to have someone who cares. Mr. Chen, and you seem like you have no one. All that success, all that money, but you come home to an empty house every night. My papa taught me that we're all connected, all family in God's eyes. If I see someone suffering and I do nothing, I'm the one who loses my humanity. Marcus felt his throat tighten again. I want to do something for you. For Sophia, No, Elena shook her head firmly. I don't take charity, Mr. Chen. It's not charity. Consider it a salary adjustment. You've been doing more than cleaning. You've been— He paused, searching for words he'd never needed before. You've been taking care of me. That deserves proper compensation. Mr. Chen, I'm also reducing your hours. I want you to have more time with Sophia during her treatment. Full salary, better benefits, and— He took a breath. And I'd like to meet her sometime. If that's okay? Elena stared at him, tears spilling over. Why are you doing this? Because last night you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, Marcus said, his own voice rough with emotion. That success without humanity is just expensive loneliness. My mother used to say that. Before she died, she made me promise to stay kind, to remember that money is a tool, not a purpose. I broke that promise. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city he'd conquered but never really seen. I have $4 billion, Elena. I can buy anything. But I can't buy what you have, the ability to see people, really see them. To care without expecting anything back. I've spent 20 years building an empire, and somewhere along the way, I forgot how to build a life. Elena stood, walked over to him. For the first time since she'd started working for him, she met his eyes directly. It's not too late, Mr. Chen. It's never too late to come home to yourself. 6 months later, Marcus Chen made headlines. Not for a merger or acquisition, but for announcing a new foundation dedicated to providing health care for families of service workers. At the launch event, he stood at the podium with a little girl beside him, her head covered with a bright pink scarf, her smile radiant despite her illness. "This is Sophia Morales," Marcus told the crowd. "She's 8 years old, she loves dinosaurs, and she's my goddaughter. Her mother, Elena, taught me the most valuable business lesson I've ever learned, that the measure of success isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away. Not just money, but time, attention, and care." He looked down at Sophia, who grinned up at him, then out at the audience. "I spent 2 decades building wealth. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life building something that actually matters: connection, community, and compassion. Because the truth is, I was a billionaire who had nothing until a shy Maid had the courage to care about someone who'd forgotten how to care about himself." In the front row, Elena wiped her eyes, watching the man who'd become like family, who joined them for dinner every Sunday, who read to Sophia during her treatment sessions, who'd learned that the greatest luxury isn't a penthouse view, it's being seen, truly seen, by another human being. Marcus had finally learned to cry again. But more importantly, he'd learned to live